Hello everyone. Can everyone at the back hear me fine? That's good. Is everyone's ears still okay after the first time I spoke? Okay. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming to obviously our Nature on Tap talk this month. It's going to be a very good one. For those of you who've been to one of these before, you guys know the drill. But for those of you who haven't been here before, us as Nature on Tap pretty much just we we provide these free conservation and research talks to the public just to educate everyone about what's going on in the area and what the reality is actually of conservation in this landscape that we live in. So we also raise some funds and help supplement some of these projects that are struggling a bit. So there is a donations box going around if you guys feel generous afterwards. But yeah. Before I continue and before I introduce our speaker tonight, a big thanks firstly to Thirsty Giraffe for hosting us. I really appreciate it. Yes, thanks for the round of applause. There we go. Then obviously Painted Dog TV who filmed this and they put it on YouTube, so whoever misses these talks can actually go on afterwards and watch them. And then finally Scales Conservation Fund who helped us raise the funding and they provide some logistical help. But before I bore you with all that stuff, I'm going to just hand over to old Bart over here. So this is Bart from... He's not old. He's charming. This is Bart from Wildscapes Veterinary Services, and he's going to talk to us all about the harsh reality of snaring, actually, that's going on in this area. So everyone, big round of applause for Bart.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Let me just go stand here. Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. Oh, maybe not there. I'll stand here. Thanks for joining us tonight. I just want to show you a little bit what's going on behind the scenes. We all know about the snaring issues, and I think you've all are wearing a down-to-the-wire Bengal potentially. But it will be interesting to see what's actually going on behind the scenes. So a little bit about me. I'm working now here in Hoedspruit for the last 4 months, together with my colleagues Joel on the right side and Ben on the left side. Ben just walked in. And before that I was working at the University of Pretoria for 3 years where I did my wildlife specialization. And before that I was mainly working with horses in the Netherlands and the UK. I do see some young kids around. So yeah, not only the images can be shocking, my language can be shocking as well. So yeah, sometimes you might need to cover ears and eyes. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are snares, why do we see them so much, what are the consequences of those snares, and what can we do about those snares and what can you do about it. So here on the image you can actually see a massive loop being set up, and that's obviously to trap bigger species such as zebra and buffalo, but you also get the smaller ones. And these horrible wire snares, they become entangled and they get tighter and tighter, but often the animals are strong enough to actually take them off the tree that they're attached to, or they can actually bite through them, and they start roaming around with those snares around their neck or other places. So it's a very common method of poaching, and it's actually increasing quite strongly. Like I said, it's an anchored wire, and typically they set them on game trails or close to water where there's a lot of animals passing through. And there's different snares depending on what targets they're trying to reach. Thank you. So they'll set small snares for the smaller antelopes, and then the bigger snares for anything bigger than a zebra and buffalo. But unfortunately elephants get trapped in them, giraffe get trapped in them, and obviously they are a lot stronger, break those snares and start walking around with the snares around their legs or like I said, other places. And it's a very a-specific way of poaching, so you can't really tell what's going to go into that trap. And that and obviously a poacher comes into a reserve, puts a trap down, and then he can leave, and obviously there's a small chance of that poacher getting caught because it's so there's not really fingerprints, and it's difficult to trace a person to a certain trap. So this is a little bit of an example. So a game trail in the middle, and then what they actually do, they actively put bushes around that snare trap. So they actually make a bit of a funnel. So the chances are higher that those animals are actually going to walk into it. And then what they sometimes do is they use smaller snares for the smaller species, and they just use a huge row of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 snares in a row to catch those animals. And then what we've seen more and more as well is where they put a bait in the middle, and especially if they're trapping carnivores, where they put a bait in the middle and then they make almost like a boma around it, where animals have to come through the snares to get to the bait. And they're setting snares for lions, caracal, jackal, all those species that they use in traditional medicine as well. So why do they go for these species? One would be bushmeat, and it can be used for themselves if they want to consume it themselves. But what we see and what we think is that there's quite an increase in the commercial poaching as well, where they actually go ahead and sell the bushmeat, so not only for their personal use. And then a lot of the parts are also used in the traditional medicine and dark practices that we'll talk about a little bit later. And what we sadly see is that often they put up snares and they forget where they put up snares, so we find animals dead, and often we found bones that are still in snares of carcasses that have been eaten by other species. And like I said, often what we deal with is the animals that break out of the snares and start roaming around with them. So this is the Mai market in Joburg. It's a famous market for traditional medicine, and a lot of body parts are still being sold there as we speak. Has snake skins and all sorts of roots of endangered plants and things like that as well. And then this is a example of a bushmeat market at an unknown location, but like I said, that it's pretty much commercial use for these poached animals. And you can actually see, I think, a leopard skin in the background there as well. So what are the consequences of these snares? What do we see of it? The animal normally dies because of strangulation, but obviously we don't often see those animals. If they don't die because of strangulation, they are being killed when they're found by the poacher. And if they're not found or not killed, there's a large chance that that animal will break loose, and it will start roaming around with the snare. And the nasty thing about these snares is that they become tighter and tighter over time. And I've seen buffaloes being strangled by them walking around but struggling to breathe because they're so tight around the neck. Seen them around joints where the animals become more and more lame over time. And it's just very hard to get them off for the animal. We see mainly in hyenas and wild dogs that they actually actively try to bite the snares off them. And they often end up around the mouth, or you can see scars around the mouth, which we'll show you a little bit later. We've seen a wide variety of injuries, and they are quite different per species, interestingly enough. For example, a leopard, we mostly see them around the thorax or the abdomen. And I think that's just because the way they walk very carefully, they step over things very carefully. Then an elephant mostly gets them around the trunk or the hind legs, and again an elephant will probably tremble that snare first by walking over it, then it's flat, and then it will step in it with its hind leg, set the step, and then it's trapped. We've also seen some horrible trunk injuries, which I'll show you later. Zebra, interestingly enough, mostly leg or neck. And then wild dogs, horrible snares around the mouth, but also neck and abdomen. And then what makes that treatment so challenging? Obviously we are in the bush, and often these animals are compromised, have horrible wounds around their body. and we'll have to immobilize them. And immobilizing an animal that's compromised is always a tricky situation, because the capture drugs that we need to use are quite potent and they're quite strong, so they have negative side effects on the body, and therefore we have to think about it very carefully. Often they have serious skin and muscle trauma, so we have to think about, can we suture those wounds, how can we treat those wounds as good as possible. We can't always suture the skin together because it might get infected. If you suture something that is infected, you're basically creating an abscess. You're making, it can't drain anymore, so all the body fluids and all the bacteria will pile up and just create an abscess basically. Then we see a lot of infected wounds with necrosis, a lot of skin damage, and often very infected wounds with maggots, although the maggots are not always bad because they actually eat the necrotic tissue. But yeah, it's just disgusting, and obviously they also start, after a while, they start eating the healthy skin away as well. So you kind of want to get rid of them. And then, like I said, I've also seen a buffalo where the trachea was actually damaged, and my colleagues also seen animals with the same issues where the trachea or the esophagus are damaged, and those animals are struggling to breathe, struggling to eat. And then we have to make a decision, is this animal, is it going to be living a happy life? I think that's sometimes one of the most difficult decisions to make for us. We have to think about, if we wake this animal up, is this animal going to be viable? Is it going to be, can it live its normal life without being pestered by pain or straight away eaten by other species? Obviously in the field it's difficult to perform a sterile surgery. Like I said, these wounds are often horribly infected, so we try to clean those wounds as much as we can. And often we only have one chance to treat those animals. Even an elephant like this, you would think like, oh, I'm sure you'll see an elephant again. But often we only see them once. Maybe very lucky, months down the line we will see them again. And often they do quite well. But often we only have one shot at performing a treatment. And what makes that difficult as well is that we don't really know what our treatments... We don't really know what our treatments do because we don't see the animals again. So we might give them antibiotics, or we might try a new antimicrobial cream, but we don't know the outcome. And that's difficult in these open systems. So yeah, we try hard, and I think most of the time we come right, but yeah, sometimes we can't really monitor what's going on with those animals. And then, like I said, sometimes we have to decide, we should probably euthanize this animal. But again, that line is very fine. Wild animals do tend to recover very well, whereas me as a horse vet originally would see a horse with a severe wound, I would be like, ooh, a horse will never be okay. But then you see the same thing in a zebra, and 2 months later that zebra is fine. So they are completely different in that perspective. So yeah, what do we actually do? We don't only talk about it, but we actually do go out and make our hands dirty once in a while. Thank you, Kayla, for these pictures that I'm going to show you now. So first is the location of the animal, which is again incredibly difficult in these open systems. We rely a lot on the reserve managers. The tourists actually that go out on the game drives and that sometimes sit with an animal if they see an animal with a snare, and we'll tell them, just stay there. It might be very boring, but you're going to have to sit there for 2 hours, keep an eye on that animal, and we'll try and get there as soon as we can. Some of the animals have collars on, so a lot of the wild dog packs in this area, there will be at least 1 or 2 animals with a collar on, so we can actually find the pack quite easily. And yeah, sometimes you have to wait quite a long time, so I've adapted myself. I can nap in any position at any time, and I can wait for long times. And then even if you see the animal, that animal might have a limp because of something else that happened. It might not have a snare, so you're going to have to look very carefully and decide very carefully that animal is actually compromised and that animal does need a treatment. Just the other day we actually went out, Ronja called us for a wild dog with a snare. We went out, we saw the wild dogs. I looked at the wild dogs and I was like, this is not one wild dog with a snare. and there was actually 4 of the 5 wild dogs had a snare. So then you have to make a decision, which one are we going to treat first, because the chances that you can dart all 4 at the same time is very, very small. And then if you see it, that animal with a snare, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually dart it. You have to get quite close. Some of these wild dog packs are extremely skittish, or hyena even more so. And you have to get in a certain distance for that dart gun to be able to actually be effective and safely get the drugs into the animal. And then if you get a dart in, where's that animal going to go? Obviously they get a pain response onto the dart, and often they will start running, even if they are on a bait or a carcass. Often they will start running, and that's the moment you're going to have to keep your eyes wide open and try to follow that animal. You don't want to go start running after the animal, because then the animal thinks like, why is he running? I should be running, let's all run. So it's a very fine balance of not running, but running and still looking, and yeah. And then often we use a bait. If we're looking for carnivores, we use a bait. So if you can see here, there's a warthog. So we'll put a warthog up, and then we have a little speaker that can actually play all sorts of sounds. We've been very effective with the bleating goat for some reason. Most carnivores tend to respond to that. And they can come in from far, like kilometers. They will hear that call and actually will come to see what is going on there. They'll start feeding, and we'll just give them some time to get relaxed. Often they're quite skittish, and that's the moment when they are properly feeding. Then we'll slowly drive in with the car, and we'll try to get a dart in those animals. Sometimes we're very lucky. Ronja spent about 3 months for this hyena, trying to get it into a cage trap, and that makes our life obviously a lot easier. So we put a bait in the cage, and the hyena will go in. We are close by. The moment the hyena goes in, we'll just dart it in the cage, and obviously that makes our life a lot easier. And especially for all these skittish animals, it works quite nicely. Then we go in for the dart. That can be by vehicle. For the bigger species like elephant, rhinos, we also see those with snares. We tend to use a helicopter. Especially with elephants, if that's a calf or if it's an older female, you want to kind of push the rest of the herd away so you can work safely on that animal. A wild dog you can pick up and put in the back of a bakkie and drive away from the pack, but with an elephant, to put that in the back of a bakkie, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So we often ask Jerry or Jana to stay in the air. They push the rest of the herd away so we can work safely on the ground. And those are the 3 dart guns that we have available, and they all work a little bit different, but mostly they work in either air or they work with a little bit of gunpowder. And then we have a lot of drugs to choose from, and this is often why we get grey hairs as well. There's so many options of drugs, and you have to think about the situation of the animal. How compromised is that animal? Is that animal going to die on anesthesia? Is it a very sunny day? Then you want the animal down nice and quickly. Is it a very cold day? Then you have a little bit more time. The size and the location of the wound. Obviously, if that animal has a very tight snare around the neck, you're going to worry that if the respiratory rate goes down, can it still breathe enough to stay alive? If we dart animals from the helicopter, there's a lot more stress involved for those animals. They tend to run a little bit more, so we need more potent drugs to get the animal down. But then if the animal is compromised, again that sets you back a little bit, because you don't want to use too much drugs, but you kind of have to. So it's a lot of things that you have to think about. And then, like I said, if there's a baby elephant involved and the mom's got a snare, often that baby will stay with the mom. So sometimes we'll have to dart the baby as well, so we can actually treat the mom, and then we wake them all up together. So yeah, it's a lot of things to think about, and that's often the moment where we just need to take 5 minutes and take a step back and say like, okay, how are we going to do this, and what drugs are we going to use, and what dart gun, and how can we do this the safest. But obviously we don't have those 5 minutes, because those animals will run away. So it's a bit of a catch-22. These are the darts that we use for the smaller animals, with a nice short needle, and we just fill the drugs by using another needle, and we go into the needle, and then we just fill it, and those darts are one-time use, so you basically just throw the dart away after using it. And then obviously you want your human first aid drug box close by as well. Some of the potent opioids that we use for elephants and rhinos, one drop would be enough to put most of you asleep. So even if you lick your finger and you have the drugs on your hand, that's enough to put you out. So you always need to be aware of that, and people around you need to be aware of it, because if you fall asleep and they find you at the back of a bakkie and they don't know what's happened and they don't know what drug to use, then you have a problem as well. So that's why we're always very happy that Tandy or Leah is with us, and they know what to do in those cases as well. And then find the animal. Like I said, it can be very challenging. It normally takes between 5 and 10 minutes for those animals to go down. So if a wild dog is running at 10 kilometers an hour, that's already 800 meters, which doesn't sound much, but if that's right into the bush, then that's quite far. In a radius of, it's basically a radius of 800 meters. Zebra, and that's not even a top speed, it can easily run 1.6 kilometers. I've had a moment where I darted a zebra, and that animal runs. Zebra like to run for some reason from the ground without a chopper, and we looked for it for 30-35 minutes, and then at some point a car came down the road, and I said, like, 3 kilometers down the road there's a zebra laying on the road. Is that yours? I'm like, yes, that's definitely the one we are looking for. So that's definitely a challenge sometimes. Sometimes it's very easy. Not nice, but sometimes it's very easy. If that animal is still stuck in a snare, we can dart it. I've also had it where animals are stuck in a snare, you dart them, and that gives them actually the extra push to break out of that snare, so they actually still run away from you. But yeah, sometimes unfortunately it's very easy to find the animal. Then a bit of stabilization. You want to make sure that that animal is in a nice spot that you can work in. So we'll often load it onto a stretcher, so we can take it away and work in a safe spot, or we lift it up onto a bakkie so we can work nicely. And obviously that also takes a few people around to go ahead and carry that animal. And we can even, if you need to, you can carry an adult buffalo, but it's not really something you want to do every day. As long as you can work safely. And then you get to one of the most important parts, obviously, and that's removing that snare. This hyena had a horrible snare in his mouth, around his neck, and it was actually there for a few months. So the skin had completely grown over it, and we're actually struggling to remove that snare, as you can see here. I've got some pictures from it later as well, but it was sitting deep in the mouth. And because that skin was completely overgrown, you almost couldn't see it on the outside. And then it's also difficult to say, like, have we removed everything? Have we removed every piece of snare if that skin is so overgrown? So I actually managed to cut it there right at the back of the head after digging into the skin a little bit. And I got it into a few pieces, and I managed to pull it out. And like you can see, it's literally just grown underneath the skin in a not so very nice way. And it was interesting because as soon as I was actually staying on that reserve that night, and the owners of that piece of property said, like, we've never heard the hyena so loud. They were actually calling all night, and yeah, whether you believe it or not, but I think he was actually happy to be able to open his mouth and be a little bit more pain-free. So we gave that animal a good dose of pain relief, he's roaming around again and being able to eat nicely. So some of the thinner snares actually cause the deeper wounds. The thinner the snare, the more sharp it is, basically. And like you can see, it just cuts deep into the tissue. And we've had very thin, it's almost like bicycle braking wire that they use for the bicycle brakes. And they put that up for small species, but a wild dog will also fit in it, and their skin is just not very tough, and it's just so tight and sharp that it cuts right in. What do we do? So obviously we remove the snare. Often we give them oxygen, just an extra support. We'll give them intravenous fluids, because often these animals are dehydrated and they're weak. The drugs that we give them often reduce the blood pressure, reduce the heart rate. So you kind of want to help the cardiovascular system by giving as many fluids as you can. And then obviously once all of that is done, then we start treating the wound, which again can be quite tricky. We flush it, we debride it. We want to get rid of all the dead tissue, because all the dead tissue is going to sit in the way. You want to get rid of it as much as you can. Then, like I said, are you going to do surgery, yes or no? We've had from that pack of 5 wild dogs that had 4 snares, one of them had a snare around the abdomen, and his prepucium, his top part of of his penile sheet, so to call it, actually was cut, and luckily the penis itself was fine, but it was basically a loose piece of skin flapping about that didn't have a function anymore. And I think if we would have left it, it probably would have necrotized and only be in the way for urinating, because he would urinate in there. If he wants to breathe, it would be in the way as well. So we actually decided to just cut that off and remove it. So little operations like that we have done on wild dogs. It really depends on the species, the amount of surgery that you can do, and the amount of resistance they have against suture material. Better? Better? Alright, I can also talk louder. It really depends. The wild dogs don't do very well with sutures. We've tried and sutures necks like this, but they just tend to break apart. Because they move around with that skin a lot. It's basically, if you have a little cut on your finger, imagine moving that all the time, then it's just going to irritate and open up again. So those wounds just have to granulate from within, and then the skin will finally grow over the top of it. Fight ongoing infection. Again, here's a big discussion point. Are we going to give these animals antibiotics or not? There's been quite a few studies that they've taken swabs to do a culture of bacteria in wild animals, and actually found a lot of resistance against a lot of the antimicrobials. Animals that we've never darted before, never had antibiotics, but they take a swab for bacteria cultures, and they actually have a lot of resistance against some of the most potent antibiotics. So if you give these animals antibiotics, you kind of have to think about it. Is it going to be functional, and will this animal be alright without it? So what we rather use is antimicrobial creams. I'm a big fan of medical grade honey. It's honey that's made specifically from the manuka flowers by a specific type of bee, and I think those flowers are only growing officially in New Zealand. So that particular honey is actually quite expensive. But we're testing out other honeys as we speak. Well, not myself, but other researchers are looking into it. But it seems like the medical properties of that particular honey is superior to any other type of honey, which is quite interesting. And then pain relief is something that we struggle with quite a lot. The longest acting pain relief that we have, injection, is about 24 hours. So that's not very long if you think about a wild dog with a wound like this. And one of the big wildlife pharmaceutical companies is actually looking at creating a long-acting pain relief, but we just haven't been able to make it up until this day. But that's something that we need, because obviously this animal is not going to be painful for only one day. This animal is going to be painful for a week or 2 weeks or even longer than that. So yeah, you kind of want something that is long-acting. And this is what we talked about a little bit earlier. These are all marks that you can see of those wild dogs actually actively trying to bite off the snares. So that might be a snare that's still stuck on a tree, or that might be a snare that's on its leg. It might be one snare, might be 5 snares that he's gone through in the last time. So it's the evidence is there, and the evidence is big, and the evidence is painful. Then we're going to go look at some cases. I'm just going to look your way. There's some horrific pictures there. You happy? Okay. On the left is one of the leopards in one of the reserves in the south. That animal had a snare around his neck and his chest, and it actually exposed a piece of his sternum, so a piece of bone was sticking out that already looked a little bit infected. And I tried and treated that animal the very first time, but after 1 week we saw it's not really working, and I'll show you some more pictures of that later. And then on the right, that's that hyena with that had a snare in his mouth, and you can see it here, very deep into the mouth and very stuck. On the right, that was a brown hyena, and that snare cut completely through the leg. So that animal was walking on 3 legs, and it actually had another snare around his neck and another snare around his body. So yeah, that obviously is a case that you have to decide to euthanize. Then on the left is a wild dog with one of those thin wire snares around the neck, and that's a wound that we just leave open. We put antimicrobial cream in it, and we give that animal pain relief, and they actually do quite well. So yeah, back to, oh no, this is another leopard actually, with a horrible wound around the thorax, and Debbie actually helped us out here and did a wonderful surgery on that animal. And that animal, again, we darted it twice. The first time we tried to treat it, but we just see like they just don't do well. So we go in for a second treatment, and they actually improved quite a lot. So that's how we do our surgeries in the field. We chose the we tried to work as sterile as possible. So actually we went into an office building and set up a little surgery there to go ahead and treat that animal. And this is that same animal a few weeks later, and is actually doing very well. So yeah, thank you Debbie for doing that surgery. But yeah, that just shows how resilient these animals are. Luckily, it's actually interesting, when I did the first surgery after I took the snare off, I also tried to do a few sutures just so that sternum, that chest bone wasn't sticking out. And 2 hours later, well, like the next day, that animal was up in a tree. I was like, well, there went my sutures, because obviously they have to stretch out completely to climb into that tree. But yeah, they do tend to heal very well. Elephants, especially elephants, if the snare stays on for a long time, we've seen snares being completely grown over, and you see a slight lameness, but sometimes those animals are doing fine, well, from the outside, and sometimes they don't do very well, and obviously these animals are very lame and very painful. And then, like I said, we also see quite a few trunk injuries. And looking at that photo on the right, it's actually quite an interesting photo, because obviously that snare cut a piece of that trunk off. And then I've seen another elephant where I think the same happened, but then it ripped the rest of the trunk off, and that animal had all nerve endings hanging out. The trunk contains a lot of nerve endings, and that animal couldn't touch anything, couldn't eat. So we actually darted that animal and removed everything and cleaned everything, and that was this animal. And you can see here at the sides, this was completely. That was a clear cut of the snare, but then this is where all the nerve endings were hanging out, and where it was most painful. So we cut all the nerve endings off, cleaned the wound, and that elephant is also doing a lot better now, luckily. And they do surprisingly well. They obviously have to train themselves how to eat and how to drink with such a short trunk, but they do seem to do quite well. This is one of the hyenas as well, with a horrible neck snare. You can see how deep that cuts, and then you can also imagine that the trachea and the esophagus are involved in cases like that. A lion, so that's after treatment. The pink stuff is actually the antimicrobial cream that we use. And again, lions. This lion was also spotted a few months later, and also surprisingly doing well. Elephant snares, yeah, they're just horrible, and you have to dig and you have to do surgery to get that snare out. And again, like giving an elephant antimicrobials or antibiotics, then you need to put in like 150 mils, 200 mils in one animal, which is a lot of money. And is it going to make a difference on an animal that's between 2,000 and 6,000 kilograms? They often do well without if we do a local treatment. As long as that snare is out, you need to take the source of the irritation away for that animal to improve. Alright, then we get to the nice part. After we've done, we reverse the animal. Obviously the drugs that we use are mostly reversible. We need to have that animal awake, because we can't leave a half-sleeping animal in a reserve where there's lions or hyenas walking around. If you leave an animal sleeping there, it will be eaten by other species. So that the animal needs to be awake and up and running. So luckily we can do that very nicely with most of the drugs that we have. And then here you can see one of those GPS collars, which we can sometimes place if they've had a snare not around the neck. If they have a snare around the neck and they've got a horrible wound, we don't want to put a snare. We don't want to put a collar on there, because that's just going to be irritating for that wound to heal. It won't heal as nicely. But we can actually follow them quite nicely with that, and if necessary we can do a follow-up treatment. So this is how those animals wake up. Obviously this is sped up a little bit, but they wake up very quickly. This one is a little bit more realistic. This is a giraffe with a horrible snare around his leg, and you actually wake them up quite a few moments prior to actually wanting to standing up. You have to be sure that the animal is completely awake. And then you sit on the head, and that's enough. I can keep that giraffe down on my own, just by sitting on its neck. And then when you're ready, you kind of get it up in the air. And obviously they're going to be a little bit wonky, but they do quite well. And then this is one of the wild dogs that had a snare around his neck. It's going. And again, they're a little bit wonky when they wake up, but once they're up and running, you'll see, whoop, and then they're gone. And this is how we can track them, so with the GPS, and then we can literally follow them on our laptop, on our phone, and that GPS will send an update every hour or so we can actually see where they are. We can make sure they're actually moving around, and not only does it help us to find that animal, but we've also been collaring quite a lot of animals to find snares, as horrible as it sounds. But obviously if we see a lot of animals with a GPS collar going to one place and not leaving that place, then we know there's something wrong there, and we can actually send people. Carl is very busy with a reserve in the north, and he's on these kind of data, and he's following up on what's happening there, and he will go to a place like that if he sees, like, look, there's a lot of animals coming into the same spot and they're not leaving, and we can go there as quick as possible and kind of hopefully make sure there's not more damage to be done. But we can't do all of this work. Our veterinary work, we are very fortunate here in Hoedspruit that there's so many NGOs and other businesses around that actually sponsor our work. We can't do it without those. Friends of mine are down in Vaarwater and those areas, and they just don't have funding for these operations. So we're very lucky with some of these people. At the bottom, it's down to the wire. They actually make bracelets out of the snares we take out of the field, that we take out of animals. And we're actually selling their stuff tonight. And then a massive thank you to Remembering Wildlife, who sponsored quite a lot of our operations. Endangered Wildlife Trust, Kyle and Ronja here. I don't know if anybody else is here, but those are the guys on the ground that actually look at the animals and often find the animals with the snare, deal with all the reserves, and obviously also deal with the financial aspects of it. And Blue Sky and African Wildlife Vets, same thing. Elephants Alive often sponsors us if we need to do elephant work with snares on. And then Palabora, they're mostly focused on the area around Palabora, obviously. And then Wild Wonderful World is another another one of our big sponsors that we just literally have got a WhatsApp snare group, and we get a message from the reserve like, listen, there's a snare. We'll put a message on the group. Does anybody have funding for this animal? And often we excrete our funding within 2 minutes, and we can literally go ahead and help those animals out. So we literally can't do it without these people. And that's us, and that's the end of our talk. I don't know if there's any questions or thoughts or comments or complaints.
Just with the questions, just repeat the questions.
Yeah.
I'll start. With the Thanks. Just with the snaring, I'm just thinking, when you're deciding to dart an animal, how do you determine if it's a snare that's, like, if the skin has grown back over the snare, how do you determine, how do you tell if that snare is still on the animal or if it's fallen off in an old wound?
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing to decide, obviously. Like this hyena, we were convinced, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, this snare is off. But then we looked in the mouth and it actually was still there. But often there's actually quite a long piece hanging onto it, like a leftover piece of wire. But sometimes we don't, and sometimes it is a little bit of a guess. But what we've seen most of the times, if we see those animals, they do have a snare, and otherwise we dart them and treat the wound, which is also not a disaster. At least then we've seen it and made sure there's not a snare or another issue going on there. Yeah. Anyone else? Or is everybody?
Today I tried to explain to my boss why I need to knock off early to come here. And she is a geologist on the mine, and I explained to her I'm coming to this talk and what it's about. And she straight up asked me, what can a local community member living in a town like Palabora that doesn't actually want to go into the bush themselves do to help? And specifically for kids.
Kids. Yeah, difficult question again. I think we just need to make people aware of what's going on. The other day, me and Ronja left one of the reserves after taking a snare of a wild dog, and we actually showed the guards. We showed the guards the pictures of what was going on and why we were there. We explained them like why we were there, and they were shocked. They were also shocked by the images, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe this is actually happening here." And I think it's just bringing that message forward as much as you can. Kids, like I said, I'm more than happy to come and chat to the school and do something like this. And again, I think it's just getting the word out there. Maybe showing horrible pictures is not the right way to go, but I think it is part of education, unfortunately. And hopefully they can tell the word forward. But yeah, that's I think that's the biggest issue that we're fighting at the moment. How can we explain people what this does to other species, and in general what it does to our wildlife around this area. And if somebody knows the answer, I'll happily take it. Yeah. But like I said, I think this is one step, and you guys know a little bit more now, and go out tomorrow and tell 2 friends, and they'll tell somebody else, and I think that's the biggest part of it.
I will tell her you're up for it.
Yes, for sure, anytime. Anyone else?
Are you not threatened that you are by the poachers?
The question is, am I threatened by the poachers? No, not as far as I'm aware. Because often we only deal with the animals that are already breaking out and they're on a different reserve, and it will never be able to trace back where those animals came from. But it's going to be an issue confronting those people for sure. Especially in some of the reserves that we're working now very closely with anti-poaching guys. yeah, there is going to be confrontation at some stage where we're going to have to explain these people, like, look, what you're doing is not right. And there's actually now, the country is actually waking up a little bit because there's going to be a big snaring congress in Pretoria. So yeah, hopefully that's also a good step towards improving this situation.
What is available for the people who do want to go and walk in the bush and help with snaring?
The question is what is available for people that want to help. Myself, I was based in Pretoria. We organized a lot of snare walks where we went out with 60 students. So you walk in a big line and you walk through the whole reserve. But those reserves are often not big five. So that's a little bit the problem in this area, that there's so many lions and buffalo around. We'll have to plan it very carefully if we want to go ahead and do something like that. I think the biggest help for now would be sponsoring any of these people and buying a Bengal today, allowing us to do the work. But I think there will be a moment where we're going to have to sweep some of these locations, not even reserves. I'm just going to look at Ronja. No, Ronja's. Oh, thanks, Ronja. Because there's also a lot of snares in places that are not a reserve, and I think we should also focus on those places and get the snares out of there. And because these wild dogs, the pack of 5 with 4 snares, they actually went out of a reserve, got the snares, and then came back into the reserve with snares. So if we can focus on those kind of spots, then we'll definitely need your help, and we'll put it out to the public.
On average, how many calls do you get a month or every 2 months?
Question is, how many calls do we get? It's really different per month. We see a big spike towards Christmas. But on average, I would say at the moment it's probably the biggest part of our job. We would definitely get called out once or twice a week for a snare, I would say, on average, in the quiet season.
Yeah, thanks, Bart. I really enjoyed this evening. I think you're talking to the converted here. Just going back to that education of communities and things, and I think that's, that lady brought up a really valid point that, bringing the awesome or horrible pictures to us, I mean, yeah, it's shocking for us. But I think the message really needs to go out to the local communities, which is where the problem is coming from.
Oh.
And I don't want to sound wrong, but that's the reality of it. And I think if we can get to those children in those schools, going to the local schools like Southern Cross or whatever, you're probably not going to do too much because the kids there are all conservation minded anyway. But yeah, I think that's where your challenge is going to be, is trying to get the message across to the poorer communities and trying to convince them that they need to convince their uncles or their brothers, whatever, what they're doing is wrong. But yeah, thanks very much for this evening. It's mind-blowing.
Thank you. Yeah. If anybody has connections in schools like that, I'm more than happy to chat to them, and I think it's very important. And I like a bit of teaching. I've got a bit of a university teaching background, so. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it, and I think it's very important, and I'll happily do it if somebody has got connections in that direction.
So just thinking from a logistical point of view, say someone finds a snared animal somewhere, do they contact you directly or the farm manager or things?
It depends. So the question is, what happens if you see an animal with a snare? Obviously, you can contact us directly, but often it's a little bit easier to just contact the reserve and they'll contact us because we need permission to go onto the reserve, etc. So often, if you see something like that, just contact the reserve and they'll contact us, and then we can be there quite quickly. All right, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Just a quick note. We'll sell Bengals and that just outside, just back here. We'll just move this whole table outside, and yeah, that's it, I think, huh?